Hello, everyone. This is another installment of our SAR Artists Live series, which will be featuring the Curator of Ethnology at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, Tony Chavarria. And for those of you who don't know, the exhibition Grounded in Clay, The Spirit of Pueblo Pottery, was curated by the Native American communities it represents, which gives authority and voice to the Pueblo Pottery Collective, a group of over 60 individuals who came together from 21 different tribal communities, and each individual selected, wrote about, and curated works for the exhibition.
Oh, okay. Let me try and turn the camera around. Okay, they're good.
Oh my gosh, it's always something with this technology.
Yeah.
Well,
It's working on, uh, it didn't work on my laptop, but it seems to be working on my phone.
oh,
So let's see if I can get this to sit where you can see me
I
because I have the,
know. I have mine all precariously propped up on my laptop.
hmm Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, it just wouldn't, there would be no like invite on the laptop, so I'm not sure.
That's very odd. I know Instagram and Meta can be very finicky about what they allow on which platforms. So I wonder if it's just a mobile thing. Well, I'm very
Yeah,
glad you were
maybe.
able to join us.
Yeah.
For anybody who's tuning in right now, this is another installment of our SAR Artists Live series. And this series in particular is focusing on the community curators for the exhibition Grounded in Clay, The Spirit of Pueblo Pottery, which is currently on view at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. Um, just a little bit about the project. Grounded in Clay is an exhibit that was curated by the Native American communities that it represents, which means that the project gives authority and voice to the Pueblo Pottery Collective, a group of over 60 individuals from 21 different tribal communities. And each individual was able to select and write about pieces from two very significant Pueblo pottery collections. One is the Indian Arts Research Center at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, and the other is the Vilchik Foundation in New York City. And just as a little bit of an introduction, my name is Emily Santanum. I was a former ANRE intern at the School for Advanced Research, and I'm currently the curatorial assistant at the Harvard Museum of Art up in Taos. And tonight I'm speaking to you from Taos, which is the unceded ancestral territories of the Pueblo, Dene, and Apache peoples. Um, so with that, I would also like to say that this program is partially funded by the City of Santa Fe Arts and Culture Department and the 1% lodgers tax. So now that that lengthy introduction is out of the way, we can get to the real conversation. So tonight we're really lucky to be joined with Tony Chavarria from Santa Clara Pueblo, who has more than 30 years of experience collaborating with tribes and curating Native material culture. As Curator of Ethnology at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, Laboratory of Anthropology in Santa Fe, he's curated many exhibitions, including Comic Art Indigene and What's New in New Too. He was co-curator of Creating Tradition, Innovation and Change in American Indian Art, which was the first Native exhibition at Epcot in Orlando, Florida. Additionally, Tony is an occasional potter and artist. So, Tony, would you like to introduce yourself in your own words and maybe tell us where you're joining us from?
My, um, and I've been, I guess, involved a while, uh, aside from anthropology, from out where it would be better. So,
I'm so sorry. It looks like the terrible spinning bad internet connection sign is currently turned on. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you are breaking up just a little bit.
okay, so yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I'm coming to you from Albuquerque because I thought the internet would be better. But but yes,
Oh, the
but I
good
can still
stuff.
hear you. I can still hear you.
Okay, great. In that moment, I could really hear you, so that is wonderful. Would you mind repeating a little bit about your own introduction in your own words? I got the little bit about you coming in from Albuquerque.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yeah, started out in art school and then eventually realized the training was mostly in commercial art. And I kind of realized that I really wasn't, especially then, I didn't have the personality to be a freelancer. I wouldn't be able to get as many jobs as I thought I'd be able to survive. So I thought I'd better look for something else. I went back to school, went to um, the University of Colorado at Denver, which was a urban campus,
Mm.
and was actually there's three institutions on basically on one campus, and a lot of non-traditional students and such, which was kind of good for me. And I started taking anthropology classes. Then from that, was able to get an internship at the was then the Denver Museum of Natural History and is now the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and is a paid internship. So that was really nice, and that kind of got me started. Then when I was getting ready to graduate, my supervisor, who was also an anthropologist, the American Anthropological Association used to put out anthropology news as more of a kind of a newsletter paper, kind of a tabloid thing, and they always have these different like want ads and such in there. And there was an advertisement for this internship at the School for American Research, and I wasn't exactly sure about the school. Didn't really know much about it, and but my supervisor was looking at it. He told me that sounds really good. You should try for that, and I did, and then so I was able to be the inaugural what was then called the Harvey W. Branniger Jr. internship at the Indian Arts Research Center. And then from there, I was really lucky because at the end of that, there was an opening at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture for an assistant curator of collection. And I applied and was fortunate to get that position. And I've been fortunate to get to move up, in there, which doesn't always happen in museums or in places like that. Um, I guess, but also like so the School for American Research then is now the School for Advanced Research. So um, wherever I go, whenever I leave, people change their names. So the institutions change their names so they don't have to be that much associated for my tenure there. So,
I am sure that's not the case, but I'm
yeah,
curious about the future of MIAC's name now.
exactly. Yes. Well, no, it will. I bet. Once I leave, it'll become the Museum of Indigenous Art or something like that.
I have seen name changes in that sort of realm, so I could see that happening.
Yes. Well, that
Well,
way we can bring in a lot of the Scots and the Welsh material in as well.
there's so much room for growth. Yeah.
So,
Well, in your current role, you're the curator of ethnology up at MIAC. What exactly does that kind of job entail?
yeah. So when I started there were actually more curators than there are now. Um,
Really? Wow.
so there was a curator of ethnology. My predecessor, the late Edmund Ladd from Zuni Pueblo, um, who did a lot of work on protecting sacred sites when he worked in the Park Service in Hawaii, and then helped start repatriations at the museum before there was NAGPRA, and worked with his Pueblo Zuni to return some of the war gods that were at the museum, even and also in Denver, again pre-NAGPRA. And then there's a curator of archaeology, a curator of anthropology and such, and then eventually a curator of individually cataloged collections and a curator of the archaeological research collections. And right now there are only three, so there's a it's kind of a shortened thing. So ethnology basically was the old days. There was a curator of archaeology and a curator of ethnology. That basically the dividing line was I had the oversight of collections basically after 1540. So after the European contact in the Southwest.
Hmm.
And so, but it normally doesn't work that way just because, but there's so few of us. That's how we broke it down. And then the archaeology curator then had oversight of collections that were all pre 1540.
Okay.
So that's how it kind of like broke down. But generally, it's just kind of basically the ethnographic collections things that are made generally, that are fall within what we consider now the historic record, and things that in our institution is just things that fall in those general media categories that people think of like native art, like pottery, textiles, basketry, jewelry, and then some of what my most favorite pieces are would fall under what they call under the really nice title of miscellaneous ethnographic.
Just a grab bag of
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, basically, yeah, that's everything like household items, cradle boards, musical instruments, hunting tools, everything else, um, that normally would have like have a bigger category, but sometimes when you have smaller uh, examples of them, they just get kind of lumped in that miscellaneous category.
Hmm, hmm. Well, so as curator, you have the position and the responsibility of selecting works to go up on display for various exhibitions. What are some of the exhibitions that you all have put on at MIAC that you've had the most fun with, or the most sort of interesting research explorations going down?
Oh, yeah, that's actually it's a fun question to answer. That I When I first started there, I was thrown in in the deep end on what was they were building the permanent exhibition, our long-term exhibition that told the overall story of people of the Southwest, and called Here, Now, and Always. And so then I worked on that. It opened in August of 1997, and then it stayed open for like a good 22 years. And then we, came down because we were doing the renewal of it. And so the renewal of Here, Now, and Always just opened this past summer. So I got to be involved in both of those, quite a distance apart. And then when I was able to become curator of ethnology, I think it was like in 2001, I believe, 2002. And then I was able to work on other larger exhibits, taking responsibility for that. And certainly the one of the ones that I was really passionate about was the comic art indigene. That also was a traveling exhibition. So it traveled like to 5 different venues, including the National Museum of the American Indian. And even though it was kind of expensive to put on at first, that it actually wound up actually bringing income into the museum because of the rental fees and such when it went out. But it was just like really neat to look at those both aspects of art that sometimes in a sense you in a broad term you consider kind of like even outsider art that, as I mentioned in the text way back then, that at both times a native culture and comic art were both seen as a malignant presence on a broader American culture.
Hmm.
And so it's great to see this what something was originally considered as disposable art and art that was assumed to be primitive and such were actually both complex and had their own distinct languages and certainly visual languages. And that and the many native artists who have grown up, like in a pop culture era, using that influence, and it speaks in there, and it's sometimes very evident in their art. So that was a very fun one. And then then sometimes we've had to do exhibits very quickly, and so we did this a new acquisition show, and since we had a very short time to do it, me and the designer, we were working on it. It can't we it was very minimal, but people loved it because it looked so. They said everything has the room to breathe. It looks really nice, and from that, Isa knew she saw it and she loved it, and so she said, "I want you to curate Lloyd's centennial exhibit." So Lloyd Akiva knew, the pioneering Cherokee fashion designer. So she said, I want you to do his centennial exhibit because it was going to be his century of his birth, the century year. And so I always tell people that's because when people think of innovative fashion, they think of Tony Chavarria. So because I'm the least fashionable person around. So, but I got, had the responsibility of doing that exhibit. But it was really fun to learn more about Lloyd and to learn about his works. And we were able to go, to borrow pieces. We borrowed some from the Heard Museum, a lot of private collections. And I just find his stuff like just so beautiful. Like some people say it looks more vintagey, certainly like very 50s, but I just think it looks, for me, it's just like really timeless. We borrowed this one it's like a dark brownish with other like gradated tones, uh, woman's dress from the Heard Museum that had this asymmetrical collar that I still just like think it's just like one of like just something fascinating that I still think about to this day. So those, and then Grounded in Clay certainly was the most recent one that I've had a really lot of fun, and it's been just always a learning experience, working on those types of exhibitions.
Definitely. Like learning about how to how to join a Zoom call or a
Yes.
Instagram live call. Well, that's a really perfect transition into us talking a little bit more about Grounded in Clay specifically. So, as I said at the top of the program, you were a community curator for the show, though in addition, you were also a curator at MIAC. So, I imagine those two roles ended up blending together quite a bit. What was it like putting the show on at MIAC? What was your role in terms of bringing it in and putting it up in the display cases?
Yeah, I don't know if the roles actually, I guess they both kind of blended in, and also I'm just like crashed into each other as well.
Whether you wanted
Those
them or
Yeah, so because sometimes the museum has certain ways of looking at things, as opposed to like when you're coming at it from an outside, like, a curator like type of view, or, even as, as certainly like in that, um, especially coming into that the collective, like the collective, kind of sees things very differently than how like a museum bureaucracy would kind of like see things. And it's part of that ongoing struggle to indigenize museum spaces that that like I've tried to do, or at least tried to be a conduit in my career. And so so then when they told me the decision was made that they wanted to be debut it, in Pueblo lands, and then the natural space would be MIAC, given our shared histories between the lab, and eventually MIAC and SAR and IRC. So, so yeah, so if it was a responsibility that we wanted to do the best job possible, so that we were really honoring the work, we were honoring the project and the everyone involved with it. So we had an exhibit before this exhibit called Clearly Indigenous. It was about native glassmakers, and it was one of the most beautifully designed exhibitions that we had at the museum for a very, very long time.
it was
And
gorgeous.
so
Walk through
uh,
it and attest to that.
yes, and originally the agreement was that I believe it was the SAR and Vilcek would provide the design for the exhibit design, but then our then director Emma, the great Della Warrior, said, but she loved the way Clearly Indigenous looked so much. She said, let's go to museum resources and see if we can get about the same designer, Caroline Lajoie, to design it again, because she did such a good job, and I know she could make the other exhibit look great. And so we were lucky enough that she was able to help work with us on this project. And again, so that again, we think that she created another design that knocked it out of the park again, and created something that was really spoke to the work. The sign of like a really great design is that oftentimes you don't notice it too much. It's just enough so that it looks great, and that people are focused on the work, and they're focused on the words, and they're really focused on the stories, so that people, I see them like move to tears. Like, we had our new deputy director came in, and she was in there just briefly. I think the last day of installation, and she left, and she was just saying that piece was just so beautiful, and she was crying. So she's saying this is going to be great. These people are going to love this, and they have.
Yeah, I will say, having walked through that exhibition, one of the details that was so subtle but so sort of resplendent was some of the glitter and the paint that they
Yeah.
used as the backdrop against some of the micaceous pottery pieces. And I just thought that was
Yes.
such a beautiful and stellar touch that I was glad to notice, and I was glad that you were able to, hire on a designer that you really believed in.
Yes. Yeah. So Caroline worked with a painter that she'd worked with before, Amy Flowers, and we did all these tests, and they would show it to the committee members and to Alicia and others. And so Amy would like put different degrees of mica in the paint, and then I remember everyone looking at it, and Patrick Cruz, I mean, he just popped up briefly, Patrick, look at this, and then what do you think? And then he just said, I like the glitter. And he said, needs more glitter. He said, put more glitter, and which was the mica, it's basically this mica flake, so that yeah, so that it's very subtle. A lot of times you don't notice until the light catches it just right, and then you see that, and it's that sometimes when you add the mica into even to the red slip, And it does have this really just this at first very subtle effect, but then when you notice it, it's just like stunning.
Hmm. So I didn't know that a lot of the exhibition, even design decisions were brought to the committee as well. Does the committee involve the Pueblo Pottery Collective in full, as well as folks from Vilcek and SAR?
Yes, yes. When they had the meetings with the collective, and then at two different meetings so that people could, work around their schedules. Then both Caroline and Natalie, who was the 2D designer, attended those meetings to hear what people were saying, what people's thoughts on what some of the look would be. And then when we were doing some of the paint tests in the gallery and color tests, then basically catching anyone who walked by, including like all the native staff at MIAC and such too. Like, what do you think? What does this look like?
Mhm.
And then going back and that's what was great about the project is that they made it possible for anyone on the committee that they could be involved into the really deep in the weeds stuff, which not a lot of people are. When you work with consultants, they're not, it's like, well, I don't really want to be bothered with like considering what typeface you're going to use and such. And but
Right.
some people are, and so that people could choose to be, involved, at that level. So it was, but then going back, they said, just basically, so sometimes we say, oh, no, no, like I'll leave it up to you to make it look nice. And then others saying, no, yeah, no, I think it should like this, or I have a suggestion like this, like with both Kathleen Wall and Marita Hines, wanting to have both the activity book and also the kitchen motif in the education room. So it's like those ideas that really, and those that collaboration that made it, as good as it is.
Yeah, yeah, and it just brings in different kinds of thinking, like what you were talking about. Sometimes there's a very museum way of looking at things if you live and breathe that kind of work every day, but coming in with a different perspective can really add some new dimension.
Yes, I think that's even just going back to the name of the museum is that it's not just an art museum. I think sometimes people and certainly sometimes even made like even administration make that mistake that we're just an art museum when it's not true.
Hmm.
That because it is that native art, is grounded, in the culture, so that you need to like sometimes bring that in. If you're going to display things as art, like let people know that. But other times, bring in that context, bring in those voices that people that especially if you're grounded in clay, that it's just people's voices, their words that are providing this context that you really don't see and you haven't seen in many exhibits, especially if this many. Oftentimes, when you see that, it's pretty a singular voice or only in a very few. But this one, it just has it's such a broad swath of voices, and then it could have been just even so many more. It'd be like you could have done like a second version with all completely different people, and you still wouldn't cover the range of voices and and who have this relationship with pottery, with clay, with Mother Earth.
Right. It does kind of go back to that conversation from earlier where you were saying that in all of the work that you do, you try to indigenize the museum sphere and the gallery spaces as much as you can. And it seems like this project is just such a beautiful way to do that and to bring together so many different voices. So
Yes.
congratulations on that front.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah. Like I said, I'm lucky to have been a part of it, to have been one part to be part of the collective and to be on staff at MIAC to help that part become also be reality. As
Right.
I said at the beginning, I said because since it is traveling, I said how we do it here is going to have an impact on how it's done at other places. So
Totally.
so let's do this as best as we can. So like I said we trust the designers that that she's going to listen to people and she's It's so funny because when she was reading all of the essays, she would like pick out things and she's like, I like this quote. This is really good. And that was great because she is basically being that outside eye. Because like so many of the visitors, oftentimes they won't have that experience. Some will, but many won't. So it's great for her to say, this is really speaking to me as someone who doesn't know a whole lot about this. So that
Mm.
helps it become, even make more of those strong connections between what the Pottery Collective is saying and what people can understand from the work and the words.
I'm curious if that was part of the process by which the quotes were chosen and put on vinyl up around the gallery.
Yes.
Was that
Yes, pretty much so. Yeah.
okay?
Yeah. That's, they're saying, oh, this is like really nice, and given what is going to be in this case, this quote works really well with this. So yeah,
Mm.
that's basically how it came about. And
Oh, that's
then running it through, then other people of levels of approval, but generally everything they picked, was a good, very good a connection between the words and the piece and the theme of the section.
definitely. So, speaking a little bit more on the specific pieces that are up in the show, you curated and wrote about two works. Um, one from around 1900, a Santa Clara water jar, as well as a Tasuki jar from dating to 1870 to 1880. Would you mind either reading from one of your essays or maybe talking about how you came to choose these two pieces?
Sure. I guess I'll start with talk about how I came to choose them. When we were told, we can go into SAR vaults, and with there they had a good number of the Vilcek pieces there, and then all the pieces that are in Vault One there at IARC. It's like entering like a huge buffet. It's like, oh, I don't know what I want because everything looks so good. It's like, and that's how it was. It's like, what do I choose? What do I choose? And even just because I've had that privilege of being in the vault, over the years, at different times. So I was familiar with some of the pieces, and so that'd be great, to use that one, to use this one. But eventually I thought, oh, I'm going to try to be both wearing like both a curator hat and a little bit of a community hat as well. That okay, um, I'll pick a Vilcek piece because I think that would be good because they're a participant in the piece. But also there's one of the pieces that I really like. And then okay, then I'll pick the piece from the IRC collections. I'll I felt okay, I have to pick something from Santa Clara, so I did that. But the Vilcek piece was this polychrome vessel that's identified from being Tasuki Pueblo that has these which appear to be turkeys on it that it looks like they're in a sense either dancing or fighting. So
Hmm. And then the SAR jar with the sort of flared top. Do you want
yes,
to
yeah,
talk
that
about?
kind of a yeah, that's just the classic Santa Clara Oya, water jar. The type that you see even in like both the Curtis photographs and all those older photographs from the early 20th century and 1800s of people gathering water and balancing them on their heads. And there's for that period, particularly in the Tewa ones, they have this very kind of like what people even say today, so they call like a Victorian shape.
Hmm.
They do. They have that very wide flared rim, almost as a woman wearing like a corset, And so you can see that like to the neck, it's something like that, and then the at the neck, and then the cup flaring out at the rim, and then this the body that also comes out that also sometimes will have a slight rise above it as well. So they're just these really beautiful pieces. Sometimes they have these scalloped rims as well, and then oftentimes the minimal decoration because it's blackware. Occasionally like an impressed bear paw, things like that. But there was one that again as I write about it because it reminded me of my paternal grandmother, Frances Mirabal Chavarria, who was a potter, and she was from Numbé Pueblo, and then
Oh.
she married my grandfather and moved back. And sometimes she would tell us stories as well too, how much she missed Numbé. That there's the old road to Espanola from Santa Clara went through a place called Guachapangue. You went up on a hill and such, and she said that sometimes she would look when she got to the top there, she would look towards Numbé, and she said,
Oh.
and so that hopefully that she could see it and such, and then they would, she said when she first moved to Santa Clara, they would kind of like tease her because she didn't have the same kind of like a different, slightly different Tewa accent, and
Huh.
sometimes it's different words than they use at Santa Clara. Santa Clara has a harder J sound, so like for when you say Gia, which means mother, at other Tewa villages they usually say Yia, and so. She would ask for something, and then they would say, "She's like, what are you saying? Meat? We don't have any meat." Things like that. So, but then eventually she adopted the accent and then became a very good in a quote unquote Santa Clara Potter Also, and also just a very important person, in the sense of the village, and people still talk to her. Even today, we had a visit from Santa Ana Potters, and one was my old bilingual teacher from my fifth grade, and she
Oh,
was asking me, she says, I remember your grandma, remember all the pottery that she made. And I said, yeah, yeah,
oh, that's such a sweet story. And I know
yeah,
in your essay, I don't know if you have the catalog out and you're able to read from it, but I
yeah.
think that portion where, yeah, you talk about just sort of the lovely nature of the pot and how it reminds you of your grandmother. It was very moving to me, and it reminded me of some of the sort of ways that I see pottery sort of reflected in people that I love as well.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess well, this last part, I say that this jar reminds me of my grandma and all the other grandmas who have left testaments of their lives and generous spirits. Clay Mother smiled upon them, encouraged us to follow their example. My grandma's favorite underdress, a garment that's worn under the manta, was a vintage handmade white dress with slightly flared sleeves and a high-necked, gently ruffled collar. And I see the collar and high neck in this jar, and in the way that a rim flares out. And I see my grandma in the beauty from the earth. So yeah, so then I remember like her had that dress once and how she talked about, this was her favorite one. And she never had worn it in a very long time, but it was still her favorite one. And it looked very in a sense, vintage, in a sense almost Victorian,
Mm,
especially with that high collar, that had this like slight ruffles at the top.
totally. And those ruffled sleeves. Yeah, I feel like I can
Mhm.
very much picture it. That sounds
Yeah.
lovely. And I'm sure that that kind of writing, I know you said that sort of blending together your work as curator of ethnology and Pueblo Pottery Collective kind of crashed together. How often do you get to write from the first person as a curator?
Oh, actually, I guess at MIAC in the past, we've been actually pretty lucky. Um, it's funny actually because of everything, and I wrote all the text except for the education questions for comic art indigene, and it wasn't later till I realized this. You know what? My name doesn't appear anywhere in this exhibit. It's like
Hmm.
generally, you have a thing that says, it says, whatever curator, and I remember I wrote the acknowledgments panel, and then I realized I didn't put my name at the bottom, so I traveled to other places, and it wasn't on there. But I was talking to another curator from the now Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and he asked me this: "Is how much of your voice gets in your exhibit?" And I said, I bet a good like 85, 90%. And then he said, really? And I said, yeah. He said, we feel lucky if we get like 60% in there. And he says it's usually about 40%. And I says, oh, wow. There's also because it's so small that we don't have that many people looking at the text. And in the past, too, before there was an official copy editor, like hardly anyone did. It was usually a designer who would like catch things and such and ask, do you really want to say this way? And so yeah, that oftentimes in the exhibition, I generally can write in the first person. Um, a lot of times I just will kind of just use like a more like kind of a broader voice that in that. But in this one, it really was nice to be able to write from the first person. That oftentimes, you feel like you have to use that more passive or at least um, uh, oh, yeah, a little more passive, like curatorial voice.
A little more,
Whereas
yeah.
this one, you could be much more personal. You could be much more having a real conversation rather than a lecture.
Right, right.
And that's what most, like a lot of time museum, text is. It's like you're at a seminar or something. So, but this one is more, it's a conversation. So,
That's part of the reason I love the book and I love the exhibition and the quotes as we were talking about that are up on the wall.
mhm.
It feels so approachable regardless of your background and where you're coming to the exhibit from.
Yes,
Whereas I think sometimes exhibition content, museum content can be a little highbrow and lofty, and there
yeah.
is some of that. There is a lot of knowledge and experience told through those stories, but it never feels stuffy or overwritten, which I think is really unusual for a museum exhibit.
Yes, yes, yes. I can't say that. Well, usually times when I write text, somewhere in there is going to be alliteration just because I like it and I always put it in there for really no reason whatsoever. And then there'll be like a slight hidden joke that probably only I will ever get. Or recently I did one catalog, and when I talked about the forced attempted assimilation of Pueblo people and such. I phrased it in the way the Borg phrase when they would take over a culture and such too. And they would say, "We are the Borg. We will add your distinctive technological and biological things to our own. Resistance is futile." And I remember I used that. I almost like used it word for word, and then I was waiting for the copywriter to catch it, but he didn't, and so he only changed a little bit part of it. And he says, "Do you really want to say feudal?" And I just said, "Yes, I really want to use feudal." And so
Or
because then I was
kind of
like, "What's like?"
added a
He's gonna
footnote.
say that's from the Borg or whatever. And
Uh,
but then yeah, so when I was looking here, it says, "Where's my alliteration?" I don't know if I made it in this essay. So
But you did write two essays, so it's got to be.
yeah, so it might be in the other one.
Um, I suppose another question that I have that's sort of shifting gears from grounded and clay. Again, at the top of the program, you were saying how you were involved in both the curating of the first permanent collection exhibition here now and always, and how just recently, this past summer, MIAC opened the sort of revitalized, renewed version of that. I'm curious in the span of 22 years, just how different sort of the approach to that project was, if at all.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. That it did. The approach actually was different. I guess I would have to admit the first approach was more innovative, certainly for its time. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't of a native curation as we think about it now. It still was like basically consultation, but it continued from those early stages all the way through the opening, and it showed a kind of like how important that is. Um, and so that was great because for this one, because we were on these other types of more restricted grant schedules, there was a period where we had to pay everyone out, and we couldn't like, and then we after that we couldn't like pay them, to continue like toward this other part. Um, and for some people we did, and then when COVID hit, that changed things completely as well. As I've always telling people, I said, don't try to develop large exhibit projects during a pandemic because it's not easy.
That's
Like,
good.
and you can't exactly you can't get people in, to work with you and such, and you're trying to do things by Zoom or remotely, and it's not always the easiest thing to do. Um, but the reason was also because that it's the technology had changed. Um, we tried to add more of that. This one, of course, like light design that we never have really done on that level before.
Okay.
And also, what we did is that what we thought was important is because yeah, it was a generation that passed. There are people involved, some of the native co-curators on this exhibit, who were in grade school, when the first one opened. And so, now they have PhDs, and we're working on this exhibition. And so it's a whole new generation, a different voices and added perspectives. So that, keeping some of the people involved in the first one and then bringing in these new voices. So what changed is because we brought that every section of the exhibition, and I believe there's like 7 of them, had a designated staff curator and a designated community curator, and they basically their levels, and a sense of responsibility and approval, all that were equal, so that they, both could like, bring in material, veto material, and such, and they work together to create things. It was like great, like how Woody Aguilar, PhD, who is the community curator and the co-curator for the ancestors section, where most of the archaeological material is. So
Mm.
when he looked at the first one, he said it was like a cabinet of curiosities of just things. He said they used so many examples of they had multiple Clovis points. He said there's all these bits of turquoise beads, almost like hundreds of them, and then everything else. He said the first thing he said is let's cut the exhibit list by half, and he says let's get things let's let things let things breathe and such, and it too, and so and that's what he did. And but things still things it looks nice because of the way the cases actually are smaller, fewer cases as well. So it's like so I can bring in these different ideas, different voices. Um, that was important because it is, it's a as someone said, because Olivia said, she said, millennials are taking over. And then I was thinking about this too, because not being a millennial, I said, no, I'm a Gen X. So, and then but the more I thought about it, I said, actually, this is a good thing. I said, because it really is this first generation and this generation that was educated post NAGPRA, this generation that has been educated in this period of indigenizing spaces and also decolonizing other types of institutions and disciplines, that it really is bringing in this change, and certainly a needed change. And um, so yeah, that's why it's good to have. And so like, hopefully like in another 20, 25 years, we'll have another update as well. And there'll be all like both these Zoomers and who, I don't know, whatever the next generation will be after that. So maybe they'll start at again at the alpha or beta again. So, that but yeah, that it'd be that it's fitting and proper to let this generation have their say, and then let that continue, because if because as especially people growing up, native communities are native households, that they know that that there's it's based in tradition, that they know about their elders, and they'll always continue that. And certainly that's my hope. And so that their voice will echo the voices of those prior, and so that the voices yet to come can see that and continue that level of engagement and thought.
Right. And know that they can be a part of that process at
Mhm.
the next iteration in the next 20,
Yes.
25 years. Um, I do really love that. What were some of the, I'm just curious, what were some of the sort of technological aspects you all inserted into this current go around that maybe didn't exist or didn't have the funds back?
Oh, I was going to say DVDs. That when we installed the first Here Not Always, I think all the videos were still on VHS. That we could have gone DVD, but they were already had bought, the hardware and such.
Uh-huh.
And um, I remember the first entry videos there were on this weird technology called CDI. It was this interactive, like CDs, and they were really slow. And I realized there's still this like community that follows it, because it was the same technology that was used on the old Sega Genesis.
Oh, interesting. So it hasn't
Yeah,
evolved.
exactly. Yeah. And so, as I always said, that if we had opened 6 months later, those videos would have been on DVD, but we were still under this weird CDI thing. So then I was going to say, this one actually has DVDs, but no, we're already in the, post DVD pretty much. So things are basically just on like flash drives and things like that, on like different, hard drives and internal hard drives, things like that. So that and the light design, so that every section has its own distinct lighting, and we have four different types of lighting effects that we can use, including there's one that's like all blue, there's one that's all tan, there's one we have now, and there's another one that kind of switches it up a little, and then the last one is, like we said, it's a very a violet one. It's a very very purplish and violet, and
Oh.
so it'll be good for evening events. I said, okay, yeah, it looks like people are in the club at night. So, the only thing is, though, when we want to change it, we have to call Canada. So,
Oh, really? So there's not like a switch you can
no,
off for
no.
the.
Again, that's the benefit and drawback from this more expensive technology, because the vendor is right now is in Canada, so you have to call Canada when you wanted to change it. So
It is sort of what they say about technology. It's both a blessing and a curse at the same time.
yes, yes, that, and then now we have these big HD monitors. So even when we were putting in some of the films, someone is saying, this is a 4K, and I think that's only HD. Can we get a 4K? And it's like, come on, the last ones were on VHS. It's like
Right. We're doing
this is a huge step up for us. It's like, let us take these baby steps. But,
definitely. There's always something. I feel like, I mean, the pace that technology is moving now, in 2 months, there will be a new technology we could have
yeah,
installed, we didn't know
I know.
existed.
Yeah, people will say 4K. Oh my God! Like,
Exactly. You're so passe.
yes,
Well, I want to make
that's
sure
so teens.
I do want to respect your time, and we are nearing 7 o'clock, so we've gone a little bit over already. I
That's okay.
guess,
I was late.
oh no, you were just trying to join in. Um, One last question, I suppose, is if there's anything you're currently working on or excited about, either as your role of curator of ethnology or, you said you're also an occasional potter and artist. So is there anything in that realm that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah. Actually, just on, was it Tuesday? I was going through some stuff at the house, and I found these pieces that I had been working on that were disrupted like right before the pandemic. And I was looking at them and I was like, okay, I I don't know if I finished these pieces, and some of them were evidently I need to finish them. And then there's a one bowl that I found, and I at first I was like, I don't remember painting this, and I said, I guess I did. And I said, it looks really nice. And it's like, and then I was like, is this fired? And I was like touching it, and I was rubbing it to see if any of the paint would come off. And then I was like, then giving it a rap with my knuckles, and I was saying, I don't know, I can't tell. I'm gonna have to go to ask someone and say,
Oh,
does this
sure.
sound fire to you or not? And so, but it really inspired me again. It's okay. I want to do more like stuff like this. I want to do more bowls like this. And I've had these ideas percolating in my head for years on how I want to paint things. Um, they're like these like just for in a sense just like how they did at Chaco when they marked different celestial events. And there's some things that I want to kind of like stylize, in a sense, and indigenize and use those as motifs and to mark things, that I've seen or that I've learned about just how people did in the past, in a sense. They kind of like, both painted their world, that was around them and what they thought, in a sense had meaning to them and was important. And in a sense that would also to show others. Because just like in the potters of the past, they painted these things that sometimes, we can only um, uh, kind of get a glimpse of understanding, and then they just like speak, in a sense on another level. Sometimes they're just like incredible abstract pieces, like a lot of the member stuff. They're just examples of brilliant graphic design and this incredible work they did in just black and white. You know, and so that was what I've been doing a lot of the polychrome stuff. And it's like, as I said, I want to continue doing things like that and making some more types of pieces that I like, that certainly they'll have like a pop culture influence. I like the work, with the being able to work with Diego Romero, which was another of my favorite exhibits that got crushed by the pandemic. That I
Oh,
got to work on Diego Romero versus the End of Art, the largest assemblage of his work anywhere, and we got completely crushed by the pandemic. So but yeah, so it's funny because even the designer, she forgot how many months into the pandemic, and she sent me a text saying, and she had a picture of the logo, and it says the versus the end of art, and she said, how did you know? It came true,
you pulled
and
the
I
now.
exactly, and I just sent her a thing I had read somewhere else where this guy is saying, I made it all up and it all came true. So, as I said, the next show we're doing is called, the glorious event-free future, where everyone just chilled and had a good time.
Yeah, yeah. Let's make that.
Yes.
And then, are there any exhibitions that you're currently working on for MIAC that you'd like to maybe talk about? Any research you're
Yeah.
currently?
Yeah, sure thing. The one now that I'm the institutional curator. I'm not the active one because we're using a lot more community curators again, is
Mhm.
called Horizons. And that is going to be looking at the connection between landscape and Navajo textiles. And so I've been able to we've already had some in-person meetings and a lot of Zoom meetings, and they're finalizing their checklist. And that the both of many of the Dene weavers who are working on this, and they're picking out some really stunning examples, and they're also going to add some pieces from the International Museum of International Folk Art collection as
Oh,
well.
right across the plaza
Yeah,
from.
right across the way. They were so great. They, their whole collection staff and the curator Laura Addison, they used their entire auditorium space and they put tables out everywhere so they could have at least 10, 12 textiles at a time.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
then once they finished with one, they rolled it up and opened up another one. They went through like I think like 40 textiles in one afternoon. And
Wow.
that was just, anyone who works in a museum knows what a bear it is to roll and unroll textiles. and and they did so many, like, so I just like just took my hats off to them. It's my hat off to them because they did so much work in one afternoon, and it was so generous of them to do that for this exhibit, and and it wasn't theirs, it was over one across the way at MIAC. And so so that is scheduled to open up this summer. Yeah,
Oh,
so or right now it's might be closer to Indian market than we had originally anticipated. So probably beginning of August.
okay.
Yeah,
Well,
so that's the one, and then just we have other things coming up, and then the research we're working on some Hopi material, new collections that have been coming in, um, a really nice collection from for senior anthropologist that's in California, and she's being generous about letting us keep what we'd like and using other pieces to support the museum, and also funding us to go get it, which is always important. So,
yes, the travel to California these days is
yeah,
it's not too cheap. Well, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate, so I don't want to take up any more of your Thursday evening. I'm sure dinner is around the corner. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, and it sounds like you've been able to sustain your passion in this field for 20 plus years, and that's really incredible. So, hats off
thank you,
to you.
Emily. Thank you. It's great to talk to you. Keep up the good work.
Oh, great. Thank you. And just a reminder for those watching that the Grounded in Clay exhibition will be on view at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture in Santa Fe through May of 2023. And then it will go on to travel nationally. So you should go down and visit Tony and the exhibition while it is up. And thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you for the next SAR Artists Live next month. Thanks, Tony.